Today, we are embracing the frontiers of technology and storytelling. From filmmakers to multimedia news, technology enables a different kind of storytelling and maybe a different way to connect, to comprehend, and to emphasize. What if virtual reality could emotionally connect people and the planet in different ways? Last year, we took you on a virtual field trip to degraded ocean ecosystems. This year, how about we go inside a glacier in Iceland? I'd like to introduce to you now the incredible, incomparable, and incredibly young also, very young, Steve Johnson. He's adventurous, he's amazingly talented, 360 video producer. He's done projects for the Washington Post. He's taught classes and workshops at GW as well as beyond. This is a type of storytelling that we can use to take people to different places in new ways. Please welcome Steve Johnson.
Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me come back. I spoke here a little while ago in your class, and you let me back in the building, so I very much appreciate that. How are we doing? It's almost lunch. We can do it. I think so. I want to talk to you about a topic that I didn't expect to even get into a few years ago, and my career kind of fell into, and that is virtual reality, augmented reality, 360 video, all of the stuff that we're seeing a lot of us journalists experiment with, and to see how we can use this to create more empathy with our audiences, to create a more impactful experience with our audience, but more importantly, to get our audience to understand stories with a greater amount of context. My name is Steve. I run a company called Sea Boundless, and we were formed just over 3 years ago in Washington, D.C. to help people tell stories better with technology. And so we work with nonprofits and foundations and universities, along with newsrooms across the world to help them leverage new technologies to solve problems. Whether it's climate change with the Weather Channel or getting more first-generation college students to see what college is like, we're using technology that we can basically bring you to different parts of the world. I'm really excited to be sharing with you some of the work that we've been doing the last couple of years and share some of the insights that some of our partners and colleagues have been working on too. So to get started, these cameras are incredibly complex and they're getting simpler and easier to use, and that's very exciting. Right now, in terms of technology in virtual spaces, it's a big battle between technology and storytelling. So to start, I want everybody to close their eyes. Take that nice Zen break. We've heard a lot of wonderful presentations. I want you to think of a place that is near and dear to your heart. It could be a childhood memory, it could be a favorite vacation, it could be a around. I want you to see who's with you. All right, open your eyes back up. What was your place? The beach. Wonderful. We're seeing it, we're smelling it, we're enjoying it. Gonna bother you? Your place.
It was an ice rink.
An ice rink. Wonderful. One more, someone from the back, yeah, shout out. Anybody? Sunset Cliffs, San Diego, California. Think about those places and what makes those special. And also, and I'm going to jump a little bit ahead and think about the perspective that you had in those places. Because we're really battling right now, how do we get here in VR? How does VR affect our storytelling ability? How does VR affect our audiences? How do we get it to them? We have a lot of challenges to try to recreate even 1% of 1% of those memories that you just described and thought to yourself. And so it is a battle of tech versus story. But I want to start with the storytelling aspect first by sharing with you one of the pieces that we produced actually quite long ago now, about 2 years ago, that was our first foray into an immersive story. And we're going to talk about all the things that could be done better now. If we have audio, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Iceland gives us some of the most recognizable and breathtaking images of nature, nestled in the North Atlantic Ocean between Greenland and Norway. When it comes to climate change, Iceland is a near-perfect laboratory for scientists like Birger Einarsson of the Icelandic Met Office. He is studying glaciology, specifically the water that flows underneath, causing glaciers to slide.
So on the interface between the bedrock and the ice, the glacier is sliding, and if you add water to that interface, it can act as a lubrication for that sliding plane. And most of our glaciers have been losing mass during the last 20 years or so.
The sliding increases as glaciers melt, forming moulins, or giant holes in the surfaces, where water flows into a complex network of rivers below.
So probably earlier this summer or late during last autumn, this would all be water-filled, water flowing through here, transporting melt from the surface of the glacier and by the base and out to the proglacial river.
Iceland's glaciers provide scientists like Einarsson with valuable data that can help predict larger, more inaccessible melting like those in Greenland.
Maybe 200 years ago, we would look at glaciers as a bad thing, like a dragon coming down from the mountains, devastating the farmland and so on. And maybe they are dragons. They are big and powerful and they are strong, but they are also delicate creatures.
It has been predicted that sea levels could rise as much as 1 meter over the next 100 years. These glaciers provide crucial data to Einarsson and his team at the Icelandic Met Office, measuring the melting ice runoff and predicting changes in their environment to provide data on climate change. So we did this piece about 2 years ago, in February. And the reason why I like showing this, especially to this group, we had no idea what we were doing. We had 3D printed parts, 24 GoPro cameras. They were freezing, they were breaking. We didn't know how to put graphics in 360. If any of you have studied map making, we're trying to take a sphere and flatten it out and then put in a sphere again. We didn't know if they should be on camera. We didn't know if the camera should work. We didn't know where to put the cameras and what perspective they should, because we really hadn't seen a lot of this storytelling before. We were so nervous about it not working that I brought laptops into the glacier with extra giant batteries, because we needed to see if the footage would even stitch and work before we left, because it took about 2 hours to seal crawl through these little tubes to get into the glacier. And even going back to our first presentation we heard this morning, the power of direct sunlight, sun would actually come through, and that entire piece inside was lit with natural light, even though there was about 20 feet of ice and another 10 feet of snow between us and the surface. And so why I show this is to encourage all of you is to try something new with your storytelling. We hadn't seen it before, it hadn't worked, and it might not have worked, and we were very fortunate. But what this ended up doing when we produced this for the Weather Channel was for us to move the bar even further. What perspectives work better with our audiences? Do they like being guided through a story, or do they like discovering things on their own? How can we research this to draw more of a connection for a place that you might never go in your entire life, but you can virtually explore it? And so generally, when we work on our pieces of journalism, we plan it, we produce it, and then we distribute it. The distribution models are already in place. We know where they're going to go, and we know how our audience is going to consume this. When it comes to immersive storytelling in some of these VR environments, you pretty much have to get rid of that numerical process. You have to plan, produce, and distribute simultaneously. What you get in the field is very much going to differ how you plan your story. The distribution process of VR is changing every day. It was at that time Facebook 360 video. It's changing very quickly with cheaper and more available headsets. But also to think about this is a holistic model that can change. Just because it worked one time doesn't mean we're going to be able to replicate this every time. Our stories are constantly changing when building these immersive environments. So what worked really well in a glacier might not work really well if we're going underwater and studying coral reefs. And that's what we did. We started testing different scenarios that these cameras could work. So this is a stretched out version of that 360 video. This is how we edit. And we went scuba diving with the Smithsonian to map bleaching coral reefs off the coast of Panama. And then we took it up to Fort McMurray during one of the worst wildfires in the history of Canada and started to study how is this affecting families in disaster recovery. And we had a little bit of a breakthrough during this particular piece. This is a photograph that I shot during our coverage for the Weather Channel, the Fort McMurray fires. For those of you photojournalists, a 70 to 200 millimeter lens was a perfectly usable photograph for our publications. But this was that exact same spot that we took the 360 footage. And there's a problem. You see a bus, you see other journalists, you see how that picture was actually made. And while this is a very compelling photograph, by taking an audience through their neighborhood that was burned out because of some of the hottest years on record and during the borealis forest, which is critical to the health of our planet, they can now see, is my house still there or not? How am I being affected by this disaster? You can take someone through a neighborhood that they didn't have access to for weeks afterwards to not only help build context and tell a story about natural disasters, many of which that are caused because of a warming planet, but now you're starting to individually help members of your audience, members who are consuming this, to see, are my belongings still there or not? Or how did this affect my friends or my family? And we saw in those maps, it is getting increasingly difficult to get our audiences to figure out, how does this affect my life until something happens to them? So how can we be more proactive in our storytelling? So then we jump over to the tech side. We have not solved all of our storytelling issues in 360 video or virtual spaces, I promise you this. But what we have done is we've started to see what works and how we can replicate this and get this into the hands of as many people as possible. When we figure out something new with my company, whether it's 360 video or augmented reality this year, we actually give it all away for free. All of the intellectual property gets published, posted on Medium. We even give the raw footage so you can stitch it yourself at the case of 360, because we feel like the technology shouldn't be the barrier to you guys being able to do this. So our technology has greatly improved. Still, it's this battle of acquisition and distribution. How do we gather this content, whether it was 24 GoPros or 6 GoPros? And luckily, that has come down drastically in the last few years. Cameras like the one to the right used to cost in the realm of $60,000 to $70,000. And now they're about the price of a DSLR, about $3,000. Smaller cameras to the left are about $200, $300 and allow you to do a live stream in 360 straight from your phone. This is a phenomenal step forward to getting our audiences to be able to even share their own experiences and stories. Because while we as journalists can be there to help build the narrative structure, we can't be everywhere at every moment. And having that ability to be able to work with and see footage from around the globe is incredibly helpful. And I compare this to just think how helpful Google Street View has been when you're trying to discover somewhere. I know as a photographer, I love it because I can go to a place and plan out angles and where I'm going to go for a production or a shoot before I even get there. How can we build this into our reporting for climate? And it was a long road to get here, as you can see, with a lot of different versions of cameras. And we're actually getting even more advanced. We're now having cameras that can capture volumetric areas. And in the future, we're not going to be measuring our quality of video in pixels, but really the radius in which you can move inside that visual space. And right now, we've gotten our radius to about 3 to 4 feet. And what I mean by that is you can move on an X and Y axis, but also move on a Z axis. So you can look around, and then you can also move forward and move over and actually see over objects. This is incredibly powerful when it comes to giving us a real-life experience. And when a lot of folks say, oh, VR is all about gaming, that's true. The game industry has driven this field. But our jobs as journalists, and mine specifically as a photojournalist, is why do we need and how can we bring photorealistic and a visual environment to our audiences to give them a purpose of being in a particular place at a particular time? And that's something that 3D rendering won't give us. We have to physically be there. We have to make those images to make this work for our audiences. And so we're getting better at distributing this. Our headsets are getting cheaper. They have audio built into them. You don't need to finagle around with phones anymore, and you know, it's a long process to get this to work. Museums have really led the way in terms of the distribution with our audiences. But we're getting close to taking the blinders off in virtual reality. And by that, I mean we're looking at more translucent options for experiencing immersive content within the environment that you are. So this is a prototype by a company called Magic Leap. And essentially, it's building full virtual reality and augmented reality in a translucent lens. And then this is Facebook's goal of a prototype in the next 10 years. But what this allows us to do is now to have a shared experience. And I think that's the most important thing to think about as you're building an immersive story, as you're thinking about trying this new technology. It's not about getting an audience to sit in a silo or a room with a headset and just experience something. It's about you being able to give an experience to a member of your audience that they can have a conversation with somebody else with, that they can take action with. And we design that in our journalism and in our storytelling, how we actually voice our pieces, with the actionable language that we use. But we also need to design that in our distribution models. How do we encourage audiences to share this experience? Moving forward, we actually then can take these and with augmented reality, take thousands of pictures and recreate particular objects using a process called photogrammetry. And this is what we're really working on hard this year, is we're trying to see what objects can we map, can we go around in the world, and then stitch them together. So when you have even a smartphone with a camera, or where you have a set of glasses that have a camera that can see relative space, you can then take these objects and put them directly in your classroom, in your living room, and see how they relate to the world around you. So one of the promos, of course, that magically came out was taking a group of school children and showing a whale. But what if we could then take a ruins in Syria and see what it looks like now, but because of extreme heat and weather, they've degraded even more. And you can now take those and show what it looked like at different periods of time and what it looks like today. Or what if you could take a species that is no longer with us and build that into your reporting to say, this is essentially what we've lost and what we need to do to move forward to protect other species like this. And augmented reality is incredibly powerful because it reacts with your world around you. So when you have an app on your phone, and I encourage you to check out the New York Times has some wonderful examples of this, it scans the room. And it actually puts a to-scale model in front of you. And that's really important to getting you to connect with that shared experience. It means we can then see that same object, read about it, talk about it, and have a conversation about it. And that's our goal as journalists. We want to facilitate conversation on these topics. And I give this one quote from the New York Times from 1939. The problem with television is that people must sit and keep their eyes glued on a screen. The average American family hasn't time for it. Therefore, the showmen are convinced that for this reason, if for no other, television will never be a serious competitor of broadcasting. And there's a lot of still truth to that, because we're seeing television shifting. At the time, that couldn't have been a more wrong prediction. But in the last 10 years, we've seen us start to move away from sitting and focusing on one object. But how can we learn from the lessons of the past to advance our technology forward? As storytellers, we have to try the new and the latest and the greatest and fail and make those mistakes. Because if we don't, we'll just be repeating the same thing over and over again, and sometimes that doesn't work. But at the same time, can we learn from those techniques of the past, especially with 360 video? One of the greatest mediums that we use to guide how we structure a story in virtual reality is radio. Because radio does such a wonderful job of painting a picture of a place without you even having to see it. And then we'll take those same lessons and share that back with our colleagues so we can build more immersive presentations, especially you just saw from the New York Times Climate Desk. Beautiful layouts that we can create these immersive stories that aren't necessarily even 360 video or VR, but we're using those lessons of how to create an experience for our audience. What's so powerful about this is, for the first time of any media ever, including wonderful cave paintings from about 17,000 years ago, our audience now controls the perspective. Because I'm sure back then those cavemen might have fudged about how big that animal was they actually killed. Maybe, maybe not. Hashtag fake cave paintings. But now our audience can control where they want to look. Our audience can control where they want to see a particular experience. If I bring all of you to one area on the planet, you're all going to notice different things. And you're all going to connect to that area in different ways. And so it's our job as journalists to, one, still control the locations and the narrative and the pace, but also give a little bit of that control to our audience. Give them some wiggle room. Let them control a bit of the perspective, and then they can say, oh, it wasn't just you having to memorize 2 + 2 = 4 in grammar school. You figured out 2 + 2 + 4 was on your own. So how can we guide our stories to not give all the answers up front, but let our audiences discover a little bit on their own. And this is where presence-based storytelling comes in. And presence-based storytelling is designing your stories, designing your videos, your 360 videos, or your virtual environments around a series of areas that still build that narrative arc, but really focus on your audience as not just someone who you're giving information to or telling information to, but you're bringing with you. And it has to be nearly perfect. And I say this because from a technological standpoint, we're really good at recognizing mistakes. We've got these huge foreheads, and this part of our brain is called the prefrontal cortex. And that part of our brain is what recognizes patterns. It's why we've survived. It's why when the stars looked a certain way, cavemen knew it was going to get cold because they realized a year before a lot of people died because it got cold. It's why when you touch the stove as a kid and it gets hot, you don't touch it again. It took me a few times. We have to know this because our brains are always looking. We're investigators. We're always trying to see, well, why did that happen? So when we build these stories, we know that they're really more impactful than photo and text if we do it in a right way and if the story works in an immersive environment. It doesn't get rid of video, it doesn't get rid of photo, it doesn't get rid of articles. Just like we have to make a decision, is this story best for radio, or is this story best for print, or is this story best for an immersive environment? What is the best way that we should take an audience? We all know the city commission meeting is probably not the best story to take our audiences to in virtual reality. We're pretty bored covering it too. But can we bring a particular place that helps them? And we've got some great research. The Tao Center has just started a few early studies on interviewing some audiences to see, are they comfortable? What does the length work? Are they more likely to take action? And I say if on all of these because that's only with such a small set of stories. It's our job as journalists to decide whether this is going to work or not with an immersive environment. But what I get really excited is the University of Cal Davis has been studying this from brain activity, and it's actually proving that we create memories in episodic forms that have time and space linked to them. We don't have to be neuroscientists as journalists. Trust me, I didn't do that well in those classes in college. But we can use some of this data to realize that building context around our stories and using these immersive environments in conjunction with brilliant photographs and brilliant reporting and in-depth articles and data can help build a stronger layer of context with our audience to understand an environment that's changing around them. So when we bring someone to a new place, they don't just go, oh, cool, that looks like Deadliest Catch. We can bring them to that new place and have them understand what fishing looks like in the Lofoten Islands in Norway and how oil exploration ends up hurting the cod population there. And they can start to see similarities in their environment with their own. Not always, but they might see that a home is similar or that a family is similar, and they might make that extra connection with a subject. Because we didn't point a camera directly at one place, we let them decide or decipher on their own. But it has to make you feel something. And we know this, it has to be emotional. We have to use these immersive environments to help guide you through something that you might not have experienced on your own. So this is in Alaska, and we've got a big permafrost issue that's happening, as we've seen from a couple of our presentations. And in Nutok, it's a small village that basically, this is in the dead of winter, about minus 20 degrees. This is what keeps the permafrost intact. But because the summers are getting so warm, the land that actually is in this stretched out 360 image doesn't exist anymore, just a few months later. And what we want to do is when we take you to those places, we want to show you that these are families, these are communities, these are kids that already have VR glasses that I didn't even have to bring in a town of 300 in a remote bush country. But that they too also play basketball and hang out and have normal daily routines that are being greatly affected by climate change. And so as we move forward, I really encourage all of you to think we have a lot of tools to do this. And we can get very bogged down in the cameras and the technology and what's working and what's not. But focus on not the latest technology, but think about great ways that you can tell stories to bring context to your audiences. So watch a lot of immersive pieces. Bug me on Twitter and over email, and I'd be happy to have a discussion with you, or bug me later on today. And think about when you closed your eyes, what worked? Why did you remember that? Why did you feel a certain way? How did that have an impact on you? And how can we bring our audiences and design our stories in these different locations to help explain really complex problems? We're all in this together. There's a lot of organizations that are helping out on this. Leading the way is a group called Journalism 360, funded by the Knight Foundation and the Google News Lab, which provides really great resources from how-tos to what's working to the latest on research. So I encourage you to look that up. And I'll leave that with any questions that we have. And that's all my contact info if you need that. So questions. Frank, do we have time for questions? Okay.
Yes.
Hi there.
Hello, how are you?
Hi there. My name is Brian White. I'm an MBA. I'll be graduating this semester.
Wonderful, congratulations.
And I had the opportunity to spend a few classes studying neuromarketing. And I'm curious, what has See Boundless done to look into VR's ability to actually activate the neurons, the empathic neurons? And I'm wondering, is that something that you guys have done some research on? And what do you think the implications are for that?
So first off, we have not done neuron research. But what we've been doing is we've been partnering with different universities. We've spoken with actually professors here at GW. We've done studies in partnership with the University of Florida. And essentially what we've started to look at is audiences' reactions to specific environment and places. A lot of the research we actually dig into right now is actually done by city planners and even park planners. How do they design physical spaces and how do people react to those physical spaces? And we've used that and kind of interpreted that within our own storytelling ability. UC Davis is doing the most impressive neurological research right now. We've been using them for their brain mapping studies and also for their most recent studies showing how you create memories in these virtual environments.
More questions? Yes.
Oh, he's got a NASA hoodie on. I can't answer these. This is too much.
He's one of my students. They're ready.
All right.
I'm Parker Jensen. I'm a freshman at GW studying journalism and mass communications. I'm just wondering what kind of platforms you put these projects on. Oculus and HTC aren't necessarily household names yet, although they are on the forefront of augmented reality. And I'm kind of impressed with where they're going. But since they're not household names yet, what kind of platforms do you put your projects on? I know YouTube is a big platform where people put 360 video and people are able to, with a click of a button, just zoom around these images. Are there any other platforms that you put these projects on so people can see it in classrooms with other people? Platforms.
We've been really fortunate at the development of this technology that everybody decided to play nice.
So far.
Google decided to play nice with Facebook, who decided to play nice with Apple, who decided to play nice with the video editing systems, Final Cut, Premiere. And essentially we have the same 2-to-1 ratio equirectangular video that we're shooting. It's either 4K or 8K, and then we stretch that video around a sphere. So the platforms that support this now are your Facebook 360s, your YouTube 360s, but also all of the browsers that allow you to pinch and zoom and move around. We've actually then moved into spherical projection. So museums are now actually creating entire rooms that are 60, 80 feet in diameter that now project this so we can get large groups of people to experience a common story, which I actually find the most exciting because you're creating those common experiences. In terms of headsets, the HTC Vives and Oculuses, they are growing. The gaming industry is pushing that at the forefront. What we're most excited about is the cost of those are coming down to around $200, all inclusive in a headset that has a screen in it that you don't need a phone or to fumble around with seeing if the lenses match up and that sort of thing. So right now, there's about 10 million of those floating around in US households, and that's supposed to be growing to over 100 in the next 10 years. So it's growing quite rapidly. But right now, we've been really fortunate that we can use this across multiple platforms. So this will work on an embedded website, like you've seen the New York Times' Daily 360. It'll also work in the headsets, in Oculuses, and more advanced systems. But also something as simple as an iPad mounted right in a museum display that you can click and move around to.
Awesome. One last question before lunch. So here you go. I'll let you.
Oh my!
Got it.
You were the quickest draw.
What do you suggest we do, and how can we utilize this technology?
Where are you from?
Oh, I'm from New Jersey. I go to school here. I'm a junior.
Okay, from New Jersey. Well, think about, is particularly to climate, or let's do that. So think about stories that your audiences need to go to particular places. Maybe there is a coal-fired power plant that's nearby that you want to help show scale and to show how many of those train cars go in and out every single day. Or maybe there is a particular area, let's say like Battery Park in New York City, that is particularly threatened by sea level rise. And to bring people to these places that might not actually exist or look the same way in 3 or 5 or 10 years, and use some of that data to show people and explain how these environments could change. So that's always the first, is to think about the places that your audiences could bring them to better understand those stories.
Awesome. Well, everyone, let's give a round of applause for Steve.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Gus. Frank, and I'm in between you guys and lunch. So
No, I'm in between you guys and lunch. Okay, so a couple of thoughts before we go, and just a couple of minutes, and then I'll tell you how lunch is going to work. I think we've had an extraordinary morning. We've heard from a lot of students, from our Planet Forward correspondents and others, and we've seen the kind of work they've done. Some of them have done data visualization. Some of them have done videos, astonishing videos. Jamie Dittmar's piece using drone technology and all the rest over the Amazon was breathtaking, as I said at the time. Harrison talked about how he uses words and really in his own way crafts poetry. Carrick has shared his photography with us, which is what he did down in the Amazon. You just heard about data visualization from the New York Times and how VR and 360 video are being used. The point here is, and I think Dennis and Jim, you pointed this out with your storytelling about planet Earth and your pictures. We tell stories in lots of different ways. And the words, Steve Johnson, that you said that resonate with me are 3 words: try something new. Go do it. Last year we bought some 360 cameras here at SMPA for my class. I had no idea what we were doing. None of the students had any idea what they were doing. We just went and tried it. And some of it was really hard, and some of it was really bad, and some of it was really good, and that's how we learned it and how we perfected it. Now, while I talk here and share a couple of other things, I'm going to invite Steve Hart up here on stage from Adobe. Anybody know what Adobe is, right? Adobe? Okay, so he's from Adobe, and he's got a 360 camera. And he's going to shoot.
Everybody smile.
Because you're all on.
Smile again. Now, okay, now everybody wave. Now, where did Steve go? The other Steve. Because he'd be good in the photo.
We should get him in the photo. Do I have to wave too?
Oh, geez. Well, my mic is off, so.
Well, you don't need to talk. Okay, just everybody.
Ta-da.
The bad thing about this is that it also shows a weird thing on my thumb. But okay, I'll post it later.
All right, he's going to post it. You'll see it, and you will be able to look around in it. The point is, right, try something new. Steve, both Steves will be doing workshops this afternoon. Let me tick through a little bit of what's going on this afternoon and tomorrow. This afternoon, we've got breakouts. We're going to go to lunch now. You're going to hear from Sven Lindblad, Lindblad Expeditions. For those of you who are new in this session here, we have our StoryFest finalists. StoryFest finalists who are in the room, raise your hands. All right, we will be announcing our winners tomorrow. The winners will get a trip aboard the National Geographic Sea Lion, sailing from Sitka, Alaska to Juneau in June of this summer on a storytelling expedition. So you'll meet Sven at lunch. We will have a conversation with him. After that, we will have a series of breakouts. Those are in your program. They're in the same building where we're going to eat lunch. So for those of you who are in from out of town, how many are in from out of town? Awesome. It's up and down the hall, and you can pick your activities. We'll have a networking break, another break, and little activities back over here at 4:30. And then at 5 o'clock, we're going to have a screening of a 30-minute film, 30 minutes of the Discovery film, Rancher, Farmer, Fisherman. All right? And then after that, we'll have a conversation with Rorik Pullman, our farmer here, and his wife, and somebody from the Environmental Defense Fund to talk about what we saw and how it was all done. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, we'll start the morning. You're going to meet a National Geographic explorer. Dan, what's the name of his presentation?
Beauty and the Bizarre.
Beauty and the Bizarre. And where will he take us?
We're going to see high-speed photography on, let's see, pests, birds, bats, and bees, I think.
something like that. So Quentin's going to be a very happy man tomorrow. Quentin Wheeler here. We're also going to then go into a town hall meeting tomorrow afternoon, as I mentioned earlier today. And for those of you who weren't here, I said this is with a Roosevelt, an Eisenhower, and 2 presidents, and it really is. And we will talk about leadership and energy and where this country is going and who is leading now that we are no longer in the Paris Climate Accord, or we've announced our withdrawal anyway, and the federal government is stepping away from this. Others are stepping into the breach. Who are they? What are they doing? What is their story? We'll cap that off with grabbing story ideas from the audience, which we will pursue next year, and then we will award our prizes. I'd like to very briefly introduce Vimlendra Sharon to join me here on stage from the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, UNFAO. Vimlendra is a great friend of ours and of Planet Forward, and a dedicated person who is also trying to help feed the planet. So welcome. Tell folks what FAO is ever so quickly, what it does.
Well, everything around agriculture, whatever you can think about agriculture and food. So we are for the full food system, from production to storage, transportation, retailing, consumption, food loss and waste. Whatever you can think, fisheries, cereals, GMOs, technology, whatever. So we are in the field of agriculture.
Trying to feed the planet. And we have got a very exciting thing that we're going to be doing with you in the fall, and to which you are invited and what are we going to be doing?
So 3 of the students who are chosen by Planet Forward, based on the stories they create, we take you to Rome, and we take you to ministers and ambassadors from 130 countries. We take you to a lot of representatives from the private sector mechanism and a lot of representatives from the civil society mechanism who gather at the Committee for Food Security. Most of these people, like us, we are quite, boring people, and we work with data and evidence. But it's the story which we all miss. So these 3 students who got chosen, who accompany Frank to Rome, will get an opportunity to tell their stories to boring people like us, to open our eyes to the importance of storytelling. Because I always feel that data and evidence always comes later, and that's my individual feeling. When I was growing up, my mom never told me that there are 26 letters in alphabets. She first told me A is for apple and B is for ball. So I learned my A, B, C, D hearing stories. Later in life, I realized that there are 26 alphabets. So it's the story which really matters and from where everything starts. It will be a great opportunity, I think, if you can go and tell your stories, whether it's video, whether it's photographs, whether it's essays or whatever, to these ministers and ambassadors who understand everything at the macro level, but who need that micro point of view to really push it forward. There are 815 million people starving today. What will happen in 2050 is another story. What do we do for them? How do we look after them? And do we get this world free from hunger and malnutrition by 2030? Do we deliver on the SDGs? That's a big question. So we really look forward to collaborating with you and to taking these students to Rome to meet with those who are really at the policy-making level in the governments around the world.
You will see precise invitation and instruction to apply for this, which you will do through a story that you will file on planetforward.org shortly. But what we will basically be asking from you is a story that captures something about food. It can be food waste, it can be new technologies in food, it could be conservation methods for water or other inputs about growing food, anything that is related to food. And we will set up a judging panel and we will look at it ourselves. This will be around World Food Day in October, and it is all expenses paid. We will be taking you and covering your costs to go to Rome for you to present these stories, these ideas, and your own creativity to people from all over the world. I think that's a phenomenal experience, and I just want to thank you and FAO again for making it possible. So thank you very much.